From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In the NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. It's a crisis that's quietly putting pressure on Colorado public school systems. The state's tight housing market has made it increasingly difficult in recent years for districts to hire teachers and other school employees. U.S. News recently reported that Colorado ranks 48th in housing affordability. And that means many teachers find it difficult to find a place to live if they accept a job in a Colorado school district with high real estate prices. Meanwhile, another trend has emerged for Colorado schools, and this one might help solve the housing crunch for educators. School districts have traditionally acquired more land than they need to address how their local population might grow in the future. But enrollment is dropping in many districts, and some districts are even closing some schools. So a state lawmaker has a proposal to address both of these trends. It would build housing for school employees on unused school property and rent it to the staff at affordable rates. State Senator Jeff Bridges hopes to introduce a bill to make this happen during the current legislative session at the state capitol. Colorado Sun education reporter Erica Brunlin wrote about how school employees are feeling squeezed and how this solution could help solve the problem. I want to get a sense of how serious this problem of affordability is, Erica. You talked to a teacher in Buena Vista named Abby Thompson who moved there because she loved the town and she landed a job in the schools. She is now struggling to make it work, even though she's not in a glitzy resort town like Aspen or Vail. What challenges did she encounter?
Yeah, so Abby was a really interesting educator to interview. As you said, she's this teacher in Buena Vista. She and her husband, Tucker, who is a local paramedic, have really worked to make Buena Vista their home, and they're ready to start a family. They're newlyweds, and the only real thing standing in their way is finding affordable housing. They're looking at one property that is a 700 square foot house. It doesn't have a yard. It needs a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And that home price, it's now down to $425,000. But it would still take more than 40% of the couple's monthly income to be able to afford the mortgage. Mm. So that just speaks to the enormous challenges that this couple is facing in trying to find housing in a mountain town they've fallen in love with, and yet they don't know if they'll be able to stay there long term.
There was a quote in your story from Senator Jeff Bridges that stuck with me. He said, you have teachers competing with billionaires from around the world who want to have a second home in these areas. To that end, Senator Bridges has proposed a sort of a two-part solution. For starters, school districts around the state tend to own a lot of land, and that's in case they need to build more schools. But enrollment is declining. What kinds of opportunities does that create in terms of housing for teachers and other school employees?
Yeah, so Erin, I think we're seeing a really interesting moment in education. Declining enrollment means that districts might be getting less money through the state funding formula. Yeah. But it also now is an opportunity for some districts in that if they're having to close school buildings, the land that those buildings stand on could become converted into rental housing for teachers, which is becoming just such an urgent priority all across Colorado, particularly in mountain towns where the housing stock is very low. Yeah. Teachers can't find affordable housing. Now districts have an opportunity, potentially with this program, to be able to take some of the land they already own and use it for teacher housing.
So how would that look? Would we see townhomes for teachers and janitors and other school staff being built next to the local elementary school?
We've already seen some districts here in Colorado take a proactive approach toward housing and create their own affordable housing and rental units for their teachers. Under this proposal, we could see some other districts use their own land to create traditional rental housing, townhomes, single-person units, maybe some family-oriented units, and they could be potentially next to schools, or they might be out on plots of land that are currently vacant, that aren't as close to schools, but that a district already owns. So I think districts will do this in a variety of different ways, depending on the kind of land they already own.
Well, I want to talk about the funding for this, and we will try to keep it pretty digestible because it quickly gets complex. The solution that Senator Bridges is proposing in his bill would use interest from something called the Permanent Fund. This is a state-controlled pool of money that's funded mostly by oil and gas fees. What is that money supposed to be used for?
The Permanent Fund, also known as the Public School Fund, is designated in the state constitution, and it really was created to hold education dollars that will be used for future generations. So you have this principal amount in this fund. Right now, it's at $1.96 billion. That money is invested, and every year it's generating interest. And now, per the state constitution, we cannot touch the principal of the money. That money stays there. It continues to generate interest every year with the hope that we can keep stockpiling funds that will ultimately be used for kids' education. So we would use the interest, and we would take $40 million from interest from the public school fund. That would grow into $500 million through the sale of certificates of participation to private investors. And then districts who would participate in the program would also have to cough up some money on their own. So as you said, it gets very complicated very quickly. But at a basic level, the funds would come from the interest off the public school fund and money from school districts that they get from their rental tenants.
Yeah, that is a complex funding plan. What kind of funding would school districts have to put up in this scenario?
So districts would take the money that they would receive from their tenants, whether those are educators, janitors, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, even school counselors. They would take the money from those tenants and they would pour it back into the program.
Gotcha.
And that represents kind of the matching component they would be responsible for.
And, one thing about when you build housing, the land is usually the most expensive piece, and the districts already own that. So that's helpful. Erica, I'm curious, where else has a model like this one been attempted, and how successful was it?
I think that school districts obviously have not historically been in the game of real estate and housing. I do not know of another program like this, a statewide program that has set out to create a system in which districts can tap state funds to build and run rental units. But I do think we're going to really be seeing more housing experiments for educators, whether they're at the state level or more at the local district level.
That's reporter Erica Brunlin of the Colorado Sun talking about a proposed bill that would empower more Colorado school districts to build affordable housing for school employees. If you want to read more, we have a link to Erica's story in our show notes and at kunc.org. All this month, KUNC News is focusing on stories about affordability and the cost of living in Colorado. Find more stories from our series, The Price of Paradise, at kunc.org. That's it today for In the NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.